Coming into ground lines of 4 cycles, obsolete in 4 set location system of 4 tractions of division. Box line, triangulation, box line, triangulation. So we have to send the siblings lines of box over triangulation over line and position levels triangulations over box over line. That communicates to the ground lines of surface and center communication system and travel. It has direct lines of panel over sequence over track locations. All right. Platforms A, C, and D, and set lines of 3 settings. Okay. Now we change the communication lines of surface and set position location to the system. Splits the lines of the Earth and rotates the line of its clocking center that operates the system locates to its setting all through travel. Travel lines of core line centers is center communication of its platform and direct signals and modifications. Setting platforms as settings and 4 lines of signals and travel communications. Set lines of the grounds into 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines of measure. Scales communication lines of the primer circuits at 3 lines of core centers and 3 set positions. Set core lines in height settings, flux over direction, and set calculations. Okay? So it's important to understand how this all sets up to its platform and how it lines its signals into its Merkabah test circuit and tetrahedron. The process of communication setting of its data files lines its signals through rotation, surface, and tractions. Then we go through another primer circuit that puts this lines calculation setting and travel. Okay? Then we come into the ground lines of surface and set location lines of height and location clocking lines of travel. All right, then we go back on the lines, back in sequence, back in line position, bigger and traction. All right. Okay, so we have to really recognize how to get a line signal. So let's position a box into memory, into no memory, into all access and memory, and line signal locations into new memory, set lines calculations into just existing in travel. Okay, so understanding that through sequence is understanding the platform set communications and 4 lines of set lines and direct signal. Okay, ground shift, set lines of 1, 2, and 3 platforms of setting. Process lines of 2 lines of corollary lines of high setting. Process lines of 3 lines of communication lines of high track locations. Into symbolism lines and portal defense screen lines adaptations of flux over screen and 3 track locations. Center communication system all through tractions. All right, so we're going to set the core centers of 0s and 1s set position. Center core lines of communication system all through track location. Configuration lines of face, and 3 lines of settings. Process lines of face, and 3 lines of settings. Set location lines of 6 and traction. Okay, set lines of 3, 6 over 1, and position 9 over sequence into 12 signals at bottom center. Puts lines of 24 system, clocking system line setting and half lines of pi, splits lines of anomaly and set lines of 3 circles, and track locations of 1 system of 0, 1 interactions at the bottom. Okay, bottom sequence lines, core centers, line direct signals, modify the system lines of track center locations. Bring it home in sequence. Bigger in system location. Okay, so I'm just showing you how this is all set up to travel. So we have a 2-line meter, 2 meters lines equals lines in position of 2. We have to understand how to use multiply, and we need to understand add and subtract and divide. Okay, mind, awareness, systematic lines of direction. Okay, primer, circuits, lines. Primer 1, primer 2, primer 6, and travel. Okay. Set core centers, line position, location of system, all through settings, with 3 lines of core centers of travel communications. Direct lines of sight, 2 measures, 2 scales on line meters, line rotation system, 3 core lines, and 1 XC1000 on platform. Okay, like it disappeared. Change frequency ground lines of communications. Right, directing signals. Cross downshift lines of communications, all right, open sequence. Channel lines, operation surface, and towers of communication. Okay, sets lines of tether and 2 track locations. Towers of communication. Look at that. You're not ready to see it because the frequencies are too high. Oh, look at that. You're not ready to see it because the frequencies are too high. There it is. Towers of communication comes into Asgard. Directing lines of panel, directing lines of system, core lines into ring graph screen adaptation lines of surface and tractions. All right. Cross lines, high direct signals, and modification grounds. Okay. Core centers of panels, and direct signals, and modification ground lines of surface. It says communication lines, high center location system, all through lines of the ether. Core lines of attractions, and direct signals, and modification ground lines of set position. This opens all sequence. Open all panels in line rotation surface interactions. Okay. All through setting. Okay. Then we shift lines of anomaly and rotation surface interactions. Through satellites, your templates, and your tablets. Your pyramids of screen lines adaptations of flux over screen location system over tracks to settings and clocking system locations and direction. All right. And then we symbolism the track centers into opposite cycles, rotation surface and track locations, right? 3 line divisions and 4 cycles. All right. Setting lines of communication system, all levels of travel, is understanding the memory that you have already access to. So we go through box screen and settings, right? So sets calculation lines, direct and redirect, direct and redirect, direct and redirect, direct and redirect, and cycle. Okay. Setting corner lines are going this way, going this way, and this way, and this way, and this way, this way, and this way, and tractions. All right. So it has to have a direct line link. Know exactly what it's doing into platforms and settings. All right. So we process lines of 3 zeros in position of 4 settings and tractions, 3 over 4, right? Then we cross line over cross location setting direct and redirect. Process calculations highest interference of 0. Sets cross lines in line position location of 0. Then we go into line direct signals over lines of 3 signatures into 1, 2, and 3 panels, 1, 1, 1, and set track location. Then we come into modification grounds, and this gets easy when it understands its platform and what it's doing through track communication setting that routes the system in travel. Okay, platforms and calculations. And then we change the anomaly, which is dimensional layers of scales. This process communication system, all lines of travel. So we have a data port into scan communications of docking, set lines of 3 cycles, into 4 settings and set position to its operation set grounds, into its earth rotation surface and tractions. Okay. Then we shift the settings in rotation surface and track locations. I division lines into moon lines shifts the core centers in 3 lines of signal into a half moon in rotation set calculations, or half pipe. Directing lines, modification ground lines into your satellites and travel in communication system all through set lines. Then we get in communication lines of surface into track location system all through line signals and setting. Then we go home and travel, process communication to the system all through calculations of towers of communication. All right. So it's important to understand lines and locations when it comes into travel mechanism, location, settings, your memories. Position, no memory, all access, clearance, and line communications and settings to new memory and equals lines of existing and processing. All right. Change communication lines of grounds over settings. All right. Process line. Triangulation, we get a flux in line position of Y screen. Okay. Now, what I told you about the test is basically you know exactly how to go through triangulation flux, or how to go through a Fibonacci flux, or how to go through a Y screen, or direct signals modification to a box frame, or anything through a triangulation frame, or a reset frame, or correlations frame, all through computer frame and direct signal your codings. You know exactly how to do that in line position of star frame and track location. Okay. So the test is just based on what you already know, but you have to understand the memories that you come in positions of, right? So the memory is already accessed. It's just waiting that signal for you to understand, come into your settings, location settings. You guys just coming to the existing of its existence and where you are in travel in set position, right? It signal lines, it modifies, or lines of communication setting that travel, direct signals, right? Okay. So once we come into the symbolism lines as track centers, we come into the inventory lines. Then we box the frame, okay? Then we come into E, and then we come to equal, and then we come into M, and then we come into C, and then we come into square root. And line screen adaptations of flux and travels, indirect signals into modification grounds and set positions calculations. E equals MC squared. All right. Now the platform lines its signals and travel. There's a direct lines on link, process lines and inventories, and 4 settings and travel. Sets communication lines of 3 centers, lines communication lines of travel. Then it gets into high center location north lines into your hemispheres. Set lines. So you come into east line, which is E track locations. Then you come into your north line, which is east line track locations. Then you come into your south line. So we have a direct line of view in position of west line and track communications. Direct lines of panel, operation, surface, and traction. Okay. Panel operation line is a half pipe. Setting lines of over lines of 1/6 over 1/8, 1/8 over 7, one direct signals, and modification grounds in portals of communication system of satellites and traction. Okay, there's a satellite. You see it, right? You see the satellite? Boom, right there. So we had a 3-line tether and rotation, surface, and tractions, direct signal. Okay. Then we come across, oh, look at that, too fast. There it is. All right, it's there, right? Then we change the directions that modifies the set location. There it is in set position. Okay. All right, so that's set up in triangulation reset lines in the set location system, travel. All right, CPOD lines, activation screen lines, adaptation symbiotes. All right, the symbiote comes in line screen. Now, direct signals lines of flux over a line of 3 wires and 3 communications, right? Directing CPOD 1, directing CPOD 2, directing CPOD 3, right? Networks over lines of 4 and CPOD 6 and travel, right? Now we come into the waving line screens, set lines of 1, set lines of 2, set lines of 3, set lines of 4, set lines of 6 over 8, and position lines of 9, 10, and 11, and 12 set position, okay? All right, so we change the directions in mapping sequence lines of coordinates. Now the T reception line adds theta communication. Theta lines of 1, omega lines of screen, zeta, zeta, and position all levels. We come into core centers lines of alpha, and we come into beta, and then the core lines of delta, and then we come into all lines of box lines of theta and track locations. All right, so that it cores the system lines of travels and data processing into dimensional door screen. Okay, door screen opens up signals into location grid and line rotation. Process lines, set lines of communication system over cross line signals into mapping sequence. X marks the spot in travel. Okay, directing core lines of travels and modification ground lines of set position. Then we go into high centers, right? Come into high position location unification lines, direct signals into vast. Vast the volume into 3 lines of sectors over vectors over quads and 3 triangulation line settings. The process lines indication system. X3000 comes in and X3000 comes out in traction. Okay. Sets lines of portals and direct signals. A mapping sequence comes coordinates into line screen, adaptation of surface and traction. Signifies ground lines of surface and set position. Okay. Magnifies lines of 1 center, 1 system, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location. Okay, now getting into the U line is a modification lines of unified. Process lines of equal correlations of 1 X lines and process of positions and 3 triangulations. Flux over screen and 3 lines of core centers into sonar communications to your pyramids and traction. There it is in setting, right? All right, so we use the X3000s in platform. We bring it home and brings it in sequence of panel. Okay, all right. Set scales, cosmic line direct signals into modification lines, serpent flame, sacred flame, cosmic flame, and track location. All right. Then we set up provision lines of cycles and ground lines of surface and traction. Above the signal comes in clouds as an E cloud, centric cloud, over cross location setting and travel. Okay. Change the core lines of directions and time sequence of panels and communication. Okay, over cross location setting into planets of surface and traction. So we've got 3 planets lines and direct signals and security lines of panels, 3 lines of rotations and 3 travels in direction. Okay, go back home, setting lines back in system location. All right, that's set up the equation. So basically, it's true to understand how to see yourself in memory, all axis of memory you already know, and coming into all lines of foundation of nothing, in a position of access and clearance, and waiting signal into your new memory as equal lines is just existing in panel. Setting lines of 2 panels and intersections of 4. Set lines of 1 signal, 1 process communications of time. Time editing, time sequence, right? Time processing, box frame. So set core lines of 0 and position of 0 over lines of 0 over 1. So that's 1 equals lines of 0 equals lines of 0, lines of 1. Okay. Then we process lines of triangulation into 3 lines of zeros into 4 set position. Then we change the core centers of tracking communications. Okay. Directing the core centers, X2000 comes in platform. Above the system, right? Triangulation flux over 1 indication, 2 lines, and 3 track location. All right, and then we change this high core centers lines as graph communication settings. Process this communication lines of grounds, right? So E lines of 4, line rotations of 2 lines of tractions in 1 signal location setting of 1 0 1 1 0 0 0 1 set position. Right? 3 signature lines of platforms in line set core system and travel communications. Direct lines of flux over lines of 1, process lines of 2, and process lines of 3 in set position. Okay. Setting communication grounds over lines of center, communication lines of surface and traction. Open signals and ground lines of surface in set position. Okay. All right, so we go back home, get some lines in line rotation. Okay. So set position of 0 over 1 and position over 1 and position location lines at alpha, setting positions of beta, setting positions of theta, and core lines of setting of omega and traction. All right, that's how it's set up. Now, it's complicated because the center core system is off through triangulation of grounds into the powers and into the atmospheres of 3 cycles. Setting core lines of setting and position lines of 3, sets communication lines equals lines of 4. Now, the 4 communication lines divides the system lines of 1, 1 equals times lines of 0 and traction. Okay, and then we change the line core centers and adding sequence into 1 times 1 equals lines of 3 in line rotation, surface, and traction. Then we go and core lines of core centers. We change the direct signals as center communications at grounds. Center core centers, line direct signals over 4 over 3 and 3 over flux and direct signals and modification ground settings. The process of communication lines opens the I sequence, line position of pattern, and position of setting. Look how powerful that is. Going back home and set line position of travels back in its original design. It's arc. Set core lines, there's the arc, right here in travel. Arc, right there, boom. 1 act of random kindness, all right? Signalism lines, line rotation, surface, and track locations of face recognition. Look how powerful that is. Oof. All right, so that's set up in signal. So I'm setting things up that's already set up so you understand how this all works in travel, okay? You know exactly what you're doing into your ground lines and settings and position, location, operation, surface. So we're in ground lines, have high lines, high center locations, ozone, lines of high position location, north, equals hemisphere, okay? And then we go into east, then we go into south hemisphere, and then we go into west, and then we go into south hemisphere, and then we go to south, and we go into north hemisphere, attractions, all right? North, east, west, and south, all right? South line communication lines of north, west line calculation lines of the east lines communication lines of west, and north communication lines of south and tractions. All right, so we have north line as center and lines of north, into north, into north, and into north are 4 settings of travel, right? Directing lines, 14 lines equals lines of setting lines of 4 1s, setting direct lines of 15 over time lines of sequence, subtract lines of 1 cycle, sets equal lines of 0 in rotation system, multitudes plus line. Now the plus line correlates the system through E factors, core lines direct signals into factor over correlations, into high core centers, line communication setting to tri-screens, indirect signals and communication grounds as surface and traction. Directing lines, high center location, center formula through equation. All right, core lines attractions in line screen. Now we go through L line rotation and travel in-point lines into your satellite. Directs its modification ground lines in a 45 split. Process communication lines of high center appearance in 1 center, 1 service, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 locations, in set lines of nothing and travel. Done. Nothing comes in line course centers is 0, 1 in travel. Okay, now we have direct line link over cross location system and set lines, ASCARD and direct signals and modification ground lines of system, ASCARD in the middle. So we sent the communication system, we add platforms and set lines and triangulations and process communication. Okay, there's ASCARD right there, right? All right, so we ground this shift, we process communication lines, we split the lines, highest location of its earth and center communication. Look at that, too fast, can't see it. The energy is too high. There we go, boom, done by equation, all right? So the earth is shifting its anomaly, lines of its memory to nothing lines to access location to its all system that puts everything into the high set correlations of you come into existence to E equals MC squared. Communication to grounds is the contracts to its blueprints, guys. Puts everything information settings back in Home Depot. All right. Now the depot is the deposits of the energy lines into its platform. All right, comes into the operation surface interactions, equals lines and E factors. Setting lines of 1, 1, 1 in position over settings and travels into position location system of 0, 0, 0. And 4 lines of signals and ground lines of surface and modification settings and 4 track locations across its systems. Communication to ground lines of surface sets communication to crop circles and traction. All right, then we flip line course centers. We switch the communication surface and track location system all through ground setting. Okay. Change the communication height centers, and we come into the L tracks. Coming into the unification lines of 1 in the operation into all levels of D line rotations, into E lines of screen, into course centers, into direct signals and modifications. Solar sail, direct sail. Modification grounds over 6 over travel. Okay. Then we go into the center and we get in center communication setting of surface. All right. Then we go to line signals, location setting in all core centers at defrag. See? Defrag. Now, getting that line correlates to system and fragmentation lines of signals that processes communication lines of center in center communication system through operation system. All right, triangulates, high operation surface interaction. All right, flux over screen. Okay, all right, that's done through equation. So everything I'm doing is already in setting, but you have to truly understand how it's set up location of your system all through travel. Okay, so understanding that, and then we come into line communication setting and triangulation, equals lines of box. All right, so we start with that, right? Then we go into the box, and then we go into the box, and we position to its triangle, and location settings to its triangle system. That's how it's set up. Okay, so you have to truly understand how this all works in set lines. All right, directing lines, we have a mothership and process calculation. Right. E lines of 4, set lines, straight lines of communication, right? Flick the switch, we have ground lines of course centers and high direct signals of intelligence. So that's box over lines into ground center and line, the high center appearance of triangulation or reline position of 3 zeros into 3 set position. Calculation lines of 3 box line screen adaptations of flux over setting. Setting communication ground lines of triangulation of 2 line rotation surface. Boxing lines into X line screen adaptations of time sequence, and position lines into 1, 1, 1, 1 of panel operation, and direct lines and quarter lines of E lines equals lines of factor over trifactor over cross locations boxing frame position lines of travel. Okay, now the center communication comes in line signal and track location of its dimensional door. Right, triangulation over lines of box over door. All right, flux over line platforms 1 in position lines of cerebral cortex and setting, 3 cycles, 3 track location lines of provision, over cross line signals in modification ground lines into mothership and traction. Directing lines of travels, course centers, lines of seat pod and line rotation surface. Process lines of tether and 3 line rotation system to its link up chain. Directing lines of course centers to its earth and rotation system, divots over line, divots over tractions, 3 line signals and divots over line frame and line rotation. 3 course centers, line direct signals, and ground lines of surface and set position. Operation settings, bring it home, back in sequence, back in panel. Okay, done by equation. That's all done, right? So it's really understanding how to use the triangulations to your notification system to your tracking numbers. You have a 7 modification number That's a space modulation screen. So we get a triangulation of flux over 3 circles. Okay, equals lines of triangulation. You got a position, location, triangulation, and position of box. Set lines of 2. Okay, 1 line signal, 2 lines setting, and process communications. Right. This is truth and false narratives of truth, line communication of false. That puts all communication in the triangulation box in set position. Now you synchronize the panels, adding lines of 1 signal, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division. 1, 1, 1, right? Set calculation lines of 0 gravity equals lines of 1 in set position, right? Process lines of setting, process lines of surface and tractions. Bring it in position location to its pyramid in track location. And missing the signal. There's the pyramid. Oh, the energy is too strong. There's the pyramid, right? Now we signify the E lines. That's height course centers into line position of attractors. They're directed modifications to its notification system all through traction. All right, so we get core lines into a mapping sequence of 3 lines of molecules in travel. Okay, 3 lines indicates lines of platforms over cross location of screen lines adaptation. We symbolism line screen, directing signals of 4 lines of flux over screen. So sending lines of dimensional door in a higher line position to its nothing in rotation surface and set calculations. Okay, it's very complicated stuff, but you understand it. It's like Doctor Strange. Okay, now, as we go through the platforms of E factors, process the platforms at 3 cycles and 4 lines of communications. 4 lines of communication. It keeps disappearing. Process the platforms E factors over screen. Okay, again, it's too strong, you're not ready for it. Nope. See, every time I do it, it disappears. Oh, disappears again. So you guys are not ready for it. Now you are. All right, so go to platform lines, set course centers into moonline rotations, plotted 2 line screen adaptations in process over crossing screen, oscillation wind pass, in collagens, and direct signals, in wormholes and track location. It disappeared. All right, let me do it again. Fast lines, rotation surface, and track locations. There you go. Nope, can't see it yet. Let me do it again. All right, it's trying to understand your signature lines of geothermians. We got it? Nope, see? It won't do it, so I have to do a line switch. Let's go through the ground line service. Okay, you guys are not ready in frequency. There it is in traction. Done. Now we go back in system. I'm just showing you how powerful it is once you recognize what's going on with your platforms. All right, so we go through platforms of correlation lines of direct signals at grounds and surface lines of track locations. All right? Now processing that position locations, open signals. Now we come to green line surface, adding red signals in set lines of securities of panels over cross location of screen. Calculate and modify, direct signals to ground lines of surface and traction. Then all lines of course centers of blue, and rotes lines, high center lines and communication lines of tubing. Directing to signal location setting, cloak and dagger, cross lines in a 45 line screen and 4 lines, 5, 6, 8, and 12 set track location. Okay, coming back home, back in set position. Okay, that's my equation. So everything I'm doing is already set in platform and track locations, guys. Okay, you have to truly understand how to modify the system location and triangulation 4 into 7 digits. You have a 7-digit number notification system, which is your 7 plasma screen. So it sets lines, course centers. So we go through line position triangulation into 7 signals. Let's go on that settings. Okay, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, right? So it goes in L lines into 1 arrow indication, L line rotations into 2 indication, and box line screen lines adaptations of file. Okay, signifies 1 signal, process line, indirect signals, a sonar, and 2 panels of communication. Now, directing lines in position at all levels timestamps the sequence in a 3-line communication setting to its primer. Primer course lines of high center interference, 7 equals lines, set lines of 0, 0, and 2 platforms. So we have an indication lines of in and an lines of communication lines of out in line position. Then we have a 2-line rotations into 2 track locations in 2 panels in 3 set position. Process lines of Pluto, open signals, and ground lines of surface attraction. There's Pluto. Directing lines in solar panel communication lines of Saturn and direct signals in process communication circulation and rotation setting. Setting ground lines of high core lines into mercury in flux over line, directing lines of mercury into magnetic force and triangulation into box frame position. Process communication lines of grounds, sets lines of communications back and center. All right, so we do a flux line, rotation surface and track location system into a wormhole that sets communication lines at its grounds in set position. Over cross location setting a flux over grounds as surface and track location. Look at how powerful that is. All right, so we triangulate the lines, the energy line, in 3 lines, 4 lines, 6, 8, 12 round holes. Setting corner lines have wormholes into a half pipe and track location. Directing lines of ground lines as surface, over crosses line screen adaptation as surface and traction. Setting corner lines of panels, process line circulation rotation surface, and line direct signals as center communication. Okay, setting corner lines of 3 planets, indirect lines of modification system, a Merkaba, tesseract, and tetrahedron. Back home in sequence, back instructions. All right, your satellite. Okay. Remember, guys, everything's existing in existing all levels of existence. Now we have to truly understand how to modify this in lines of grounds, the powers, and the atmospheres. Now you do that through simulation tracks, indirect signals, and location setting and travel. Okay, so it's important you understand how to use the inventories that's given to you in flux over line. So we get an L line 1, L line 2, and L line 3. All right, so it's molecule 1, atom 2. Atom line rotations into proton, proton into electron, and set calculations. Now, platforms of settings and core lines of communication system and tablet. Tablet lines the high center interference of its structure, indirect signals, and ground lines of surface. Structure lines, direct signals, holographic cities, and 2 lines of traction. Direct lines of 1 into 2 open windows, 4 lines of 6 over 12, and position lines of setting. Process communication high centers into the mothership over track location setting and operation. Directing power lines, high center interference, humanity, and cross lines. Directing lines, high center interference, waiting on signal into nothing informations. Humanity in sequence in line direct signals and 144 flux into line conditions of 0, point lines of 1, and track location. Now, cross lines of 3 and direct lines of 1 symbol. Line core centers, platforms of tractions, indirect signals, and ground lines of surface rotates the high set location system and travel. Directing calculation modification ground lines, transfers in line position location mutations, indirect lines high center to its mothership, and energized location of its catalyst. Catalyst comes in lines of ground center location of its catapult that energize the system location of its system all through its dimensional scale. Setting wind factors over lines of triangulation over flux, over screen, and position location system, all through center, core, center, and realms of communication. Directing communication lines of high centers to set position location to a setting. Process communication. See? Powerful stuff, isn't it? And when we go back home, we're center and line back in sequence and setting. Hooah. Okay? Complicated what I'm doing, guys, but it's all formation locations of balance. Okay? But look how powerful it is in traction. Okay? Knowing exactly how to energize lines and mutate position location transitions, location system to transmutation, directing signals in modification grounds. Now we're add line settings. We got 21 volume equals lines of 7 over lines of 7, 7 tractions. So I'm just showing you exactly how you go through 7, 7, 7, and 4 set position. Setting lines of error indications across lines over cross location system. How to set this up through your laser tracks, your highways, guys, to your Skynet. Really understand the provision lines of 3 and set position of 1 and set lines of 3 track location. See the intelligence, see the eyes? See, we got 2 intelligence there, right? Over signal cross line condition system. You see the intelligence, right? So what direction are they looking at in settings? This way, right? So cross lines of settings of direct and redirect. Setting direct and redirect and travel. Both indicate the system and travel. Setting course centers of the sun and position lines of its moon and process communication. Core lines of 3 tractions and 3 lines of moon being position lines of travel. Cross line signals into location grid and communication. All right. Then we cross lines of signals into arrows of indications of platform. Indicate lines of XD1, XD2, and X33 in platform. Back home, bring it in signal, back in balance. Open signal. All right, so we add lines of green, sets course centers, inner force, outer force, indirect signals, and ground lines. All signals and modifications set lines and console. Modulate the screen lines adaptations intelligence. All right. So we got two modification lines of ground lines, symbolism 1 and process lines of box over 2. Right? Communicates high centers, line communication lines in purple. Open sequence, open panel. Process in the magnetic highway and line rotation surface that picks up the anomalies in track location. All right? Then we get shift lines of course centers and direct signals that grounds the modification system. Indicates the opposite direction, right? I know it's complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. All right, so now we go through 0 lines of 1 and 4 settings in box. Okay, we go back home, brings it back in traction. Okay, all right, so the box comes into triangulation setting. So we overcross location of triangulation and position of box. You guys have to understand how to go through your travels of triangulation box, right? That's the foundation of 144, right? But anything above is box triangular, triangulation box, star box, correlations box, triangulation box, dimensionalize the screen over box, box over lines over box, triangulation over box, box lines, triangulation, triangulation box, box. So you have to truly understand after you reach the platforms of 144, your high division location systems put you in higher lines of platforms that dimensionalize the space and track location. Okay, modifies your system all through ground lines of surface interaction. All right, so is everybody having fun? So again, the team needs to understand this now through zeros and zeros. They got to come into this now, right, in box. Right, that's the foundation. This is the foundations. Sending course centers of 3 tractions into Mother Earth. Okay, Mother Earth lines of triangulations of 3 over flux over 3 triangulation. Sets course centers into what? Its solar sail and direct signals modification. Right, the 4 line signals over cross, over directions, down line signal, over line rotation surface, and triangulation setting of solar sail into box frame. See the solar sails? See the dimensional sails? Well, I understand how to travel through the 3 lines of measures and 3 triangulations of flux over setting. Okay, how to travel through the box of all line communication of 4 lines of communication of setting and box frame communications. All right, guys? That's what the team has come into. Then you come into the ground lines of surface, this episode of portals. See, portals. Portals open up and 3 triangulations, all levels into your satellites into calculation setting. Okay. Open screen adapters, process lines of laser, process lines of direct signals, and 3 platforms of calculation. Okay. Then we come into the grid line, ground line, surface interaction. Okay. Overcross line screens, 1 setting inhibitors, pyramid line, process line of communication. There's the pyramid. Directing signals into ground lines of service. Then we add purple line settings to charge making lines of power over screen. Power over signal, power over directions, and power over anomaly. It's center communication, 3 lines of flux and travel. Oh, look at that. Not ready to see it yet in set position. There it is in tractions. Done by equation. All right. So everybody's getting very confused now, right? Yeah, just smile and wave. That's all you can do. Can't do anything else. It's too powerful. So you have to understand what you're doing now, team. The team is coming into traffic inventories of zeros and ones now and how they see that. Same with the 1. 1 and 1. Okay? 0, 1. Okay? 1 is 0, 0, 1. Okay? Set position of 2 and set position of 2. Right? Flight navigation, travel direct signals. Right? 2 lines of signals 0, 0, 1, 2. Okay? That's all lines of 2. Right? So you're going up through graph into all levels of zeros and ones. You're changing the metric course centers and your patterns of behavior. That's changing your metaphors, screen lines, adaptation of surface interactions to your inhibitors. Directing lines of 2 over 3 in the position lines of setting into 3, 3 and track location. 0, 0, 3, 3. Right? All through 1, all through 2, all through setting. Right? Then when you go higher, you go into higher communication lines, use Schumann resonance. Your Schumann resonance has a box frame, metric frame, a scale frame, millimeters, centimeters, how many meters, line direct signals to a ruler, and line position location of its system, all through its polarities and track location. Divots, platforms, crossing line signals. Process communications, high direct signals and location system. Ground lines shift lines of anomaly in rotations of platforms and communications. Direct line of view, platforms A, lines of C over set position of travel. Okay. Directing lines, ground lines of surface, ground lines of setting, process lines of system, crossing line communication setting, solar direct signals, solar sail communication system, laser track centers, and operation surface interaction. All right, so now we get line screen adaptations into satellites, mechanism lines into electronic fencing and track location. Directing modification grounds, you are here in travel, and direct signals in track location. Okay, now laser track centers is all those ground lines into consumption. Now the consumption comes in conformity into fruition lines of light track locations. These are orbs. Orbs set up the surveys. They ground line their surface. They set up detection location of barometers, thermometers that keeps you in coolants and position location your mountains and your volcanoes and track location. Very complicated stuff in setting. Now, if I bring this in color, bring it back home, we got a center communication setting to travel. All right. So ground line symbolism, cross line communications, 3 lines of set lines, and set, of course, centers of travel. Walking in 3 different directions. All right. Oh, look at that. 2. Where's the third one? Where'd the third one go? It's not there. It disappeared. I set 3 lines of signals. It disappeared on its own. It's not ready in your travel. Center course centers of flux, overline, energize, catapult, catalyst, and set position lines of travel. Directing signal, 2 lines of set position. Bringing home and travel. There we go through equation. Okay. So let's go through line signals, line position of process line. Okay, solar panels, equal lines of settings in flux over 4 settings into clocking system of travel. Okay. Then we ground the shift communication system all through set lines of platforms of energize. See? Energize right there. Boom. Right? So you get in the platform. You center communication setting to catalysts. Triangulations flux over line. And direct signals at time capacitor. Setting ground lines of course centers. Shift lines of anomaly. And line rotation surface interactions. Right? Course symbolism. Center core line connection setting of platform E. In position of platform D, C, and A. Sets course centers launching pad and track location. All right, over cross line symbolism, again, and center communications. Okay, guys? So to understand how to set up the grounds, the powers, and the atmospheres, there's zeros and ones team. You have to understand how to use that now in platform and set position. Right? Coming in lines of 0, in position of 1, 1, 0, in position of 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1. Okay? Then you come into this signal, process lines of 0, indicates platforms attractions and direct signals modification setting in process communication. Then you change the anomaly. What do we have in line rotations? Your pyramid through activation. Cross lines in the 45 communication system all through traction. Right? Open signals in platform communication system all through setting. Okay. Then we go through E factors, center course centers of center, operation surface, and realms of communication setting of portals that detects the system lines of survey and traction. Then we go into ground lines of surface and that position location is human residence. Bringing in signal through modification. Oh, it's not there. See, disappeared. You're not ready to see it. Got to do it again, right? Then we go in line signal and let's get in bold screens. I'm going to go bold, back in setting, back in surface, back in attractions. It's froze, bring in line signals back in lines. Process communication over signal and process communication. Overlapping sequence. Okay, so we go in bold, alpha, beta, delta, theta. Okay. 2 mountain screens, 1x8000 here, 1x8000 there in traction. Okay. Now, it gets really interesting here because this is where the barometers and thermometers come into your ecosystem of your coolants. You have to understand why we have volcanoes. We have volcanoes to basically balance out the surveys that we use through probing that basically organize the system location to its computative system that keeps the high grounds in lines of coolants, right? So we use the barometers, thermometers in lines of frequency in that travel. So we use that through a calculation setting to Fahrenheit and Celsius interaction. But we don't want to go above 108. Your central system is 98 set positions, right? Set lines of mountains or anything of volcanoes goes from 107 frequency in lines of Fahrenheit, or lines of track location, lines of high center location, underscore line communications and setting that puts all communication system in travel in recognition of time sequence and panel. Process communication setting. All right. Set core lines of channels and direct signals into inventory. 3 lines of signals and process communication. Okay. So very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun, right? Okay, so we cross lines, we go into bold screens. Over cross line in delta theta. Okay, different lines of communication, sorry. Then we come into course centers and direct signals into ground lines, service lines into fire and direct signal. Then we go into the coolant lines of blue lines of center and set position. Then we go into the red line security over cross location system, right? Then we go into the black sequence into black holes and rotation surface attraction. Then we change the modification grounds and course centers and lines of travel. Okay. Then we go home, back in sequence, back in panel. Okay. So it's really interesting how this is all set up. Now we get lines of high center interference of 0 lines of track centers. Changing communication lines of time sequence, time panel, time operation. Direct and redirect line signals in process communication system. Everything in mountains, everything in lines of structure has to have a Skynet. It locates its system all through its webbing through light and dark web. Then we go back in center, back in operation surface and track location. There it is set up, all through spectration graph. Now we colorate the line screen adaptations of color. Over cross line condition setting in blue, over line signals in process communication. Then we ground lines of blue in rotation lines, direct signals, cross lines of 2 measures and 2 scales of 2 balanced communication lines of surface. Then we get in position lines of high course centers, let's into position of pink. Now this is where it is in pixelation graphs. Start to see everything through structure in coloration lines of patterns and direct signals and track location. Then you get in modification ground lines of course centers into green lines of high center interference and matrix, directing line course centers into your heart rates of time lines and sequence lines of panel. There it is in traction. Boom. Okay. Bring it back home, back in setting, back in travel. Okay. So everything is a simulation of coloration, patterns, recognition of time sequence, all through your metaphors and light signal. But this is a mapping sequence to a mountain location setting and travel, right? What a mountain looks like inside colorations. Pixelation, this is where it comes into the Glaciarians. Now the Glaciarians set code signals. They set up lines of high course centers that keep the coolants lines. The Palladians basically have a plasma screen lines of blue lines of surface that protects the communication lines, the Earth track locations. Keeps the coolants lines and direct signals and modifications to your ecosystems and travel recognition, all through travels in point rate communication. All right, so once we have this in line signal, we process communication lines of surface and track location. Okay. Then a mothership comes in. Mothership comes in and signal in modification grounds. She comes in island herself in direct signals and ground lines of surface and set positions. Operate the cycles and line communication. Okay. Line direct signals and ground lines of surface and traction. All right, so sets lines of 3 tractions and 3 lines, crop circles, picks up the platform and direct lines and move the signals and ground lines of surface and tractions. All right, open signals and ground lines of surface and set calculation. Okay, so we have to understand how to go through 4 panels and 3 lines in position of 4 cycles and 4 centers of zeros. Now, when you guys go into light switch, this is going to show you how you pinpoint your graphs and communication your barcodes. All right, so you got a palm and you got an identification system to a barcode inside. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 setting. All right, signal lines of 1 in process of sonar 3 track location lines of 4 settings. All right, now we change the platform and communication system all through finger points, directing lines of indication setting, data processing of its highways. Out signal, line direct signals, and ground line communication system. All right. Directing lines and direct lines of modification system. Planet 1, Planet 2, Planet 3, Planet 4, Planet 5, Planet 6, and Planet 7. All through finger point lines of track centers. Process communication X2000 comes into 3 platforms and settings and travel. Okay. Bring it home through equation. We have track location through setting. All through a clocking system, all through your hand. All right. All right, so it's a sundial. Sundial lines the E lines. Now, of course, the line communication setting into a communication system. The hand itself, you can see the 3 waving cycles and 3 lines of light signature. See it? See the indication? 1, 2, and 3. See? That's what it is, right? Process lines of E, process lines of F, and process lines of C. Setting course centers of C equals lines of E. E equals lines of E factor. In times lines, set position locations, underscore or overscore, and track location. Sets lines of scales and balance communication lines of measure. Sets core lines of direct signals into ground lines of surface. Arrow indicates line screen over cross location of screen line. Process line direct signals and ground lines of surface and traction. Course centers line direct signals and modification grounds. Dinosaur and track location. Boom. All right. So dinosaur line, 65,000 line year. 3 cycles and 3 centers, 3 travel endpoint communications, right? Sets core lines in position lines before Christ. TV box, box frame, triangulation flux over line into 3 zeros and line rotation into 4 set calculations. Now, change the graph communication screen, change the course centers lines of travel. Yeah, travel level rotations. Ground lines of 1 and set position of 2. Cross line course centers and center course system at a 45 flux over line and direct signal. Sets course centers, equal line, high center location of travel. There we go. Boom. Split lines of anomaly. Boom. Right? Set course of the earth. Splits lines of center lines of center communication system as center operation. Set course of attractions and direct signals and ground lines of surface interaction. Setting communication, high center line communication setting. Okay. Bring it back home. Sets back in traction. So I want you guys to truly understand how this all works, right? Because you have to really start recognizing your zeros and ones and everything that you touch now in platform, right? Because everything has its own setting, its chronological order of clocking, right? 0, 0, 0, 0. 4 lines of setting, right? Let's open null sequence into 1, 1, 1, 1. That positions of 2, 2, 2, 2. Set position of 3, 3, 3, 3. Okay? So, ground lines of surface, center course system, and lines of atmosphere as setting. So it gets complicated because the number sequence is constantly changing everything back to 0. And the 0 equals lines of its memory, in position location it's nothing. Calculation lines of access, lines of waiting and signal, line communication setting, just existing, all lines of travel and set position. All right. So let's do this again. So you have to understand how this all works in zeros and ones. Right. So let's get into Fibonacci. I love Fibonacci's and set position locations. Right. It just rotated. Look at that. It disappeared. Went too fast. See, it disappeared right away. Fibonacci. Round and round and round it goes. Right. All right, single lines of course centers over 6, line position locations over 9, symbolism flux over together interaction. Right? Ground lines of symbolism, line rotation surface into I course centers and lines of travel. So we all have to understand how this all works. If you understand the flux, then you understand the box in the triangulation. So the triangulation equals lines of the box. Okay, that is the grounds in position locations. Triangulation line communication system is Mother Earth equals lines of Earth line rotations and travel. Mother equals Earth, which is the mind adaptations and force friction of existing and travel. Okay, the box line is course centers into 4 lines of sequence of zeros and ones in set position, 3 of symbolism and 3 lines of communication. All right, directing lines course centers center communication system, and the line course centers of 4 line communication securities and panels. Process calculation high center interference, calculate and modify into father space. And track location. Okay. Setting communication lines direct signals into awareness. Setting communication lines of 2 track locations and 3 lines of cycles. So sets lines of 2 over 3 equals lines of 5. Puts line direct signals into your 5 elements in track location of travel. Okay. So that modifies the ground lines of course centers in line communication setting of father space that rotates the system in line course centers of its solar sail and track location. All right, guys? So now you understand the triangulation is the awareness and the box is the consciousness and position, right? Now, once the triangulation understands the awareness and the consciousness comes together, what do we have? Flux capacitor. Okay, comes into its box. All right, comes into its face of recognition. Oh my gosh, this is making so much sense. All right, and then you got your pyramid. You with me, guys? Then you got your grounds. Okay, and then you got your portals. I think you're understanding what's going on here in travel, right? And then you got your clockings, and then you got your atmospheres and highways and traction. Okay, that's your face recognitions, right? Seed pod 1, seed pod 2. All right. So setting course centers in lines gravitation system out of lines of settings of 3. Platforms of 1, platforms of 2, platforms of 3 interactions, right? Ground lines of 1, platforms of setting. Ground lines of 2, platforms of sequence. Platforms of 1, platforms of setting rotation. Okay? Cross line communication setting, open sequence, and triplication. Your teleportation vessel. All right? Go back home, back in sequence. All right? So that's how it's set up in face recognition, pattern recognition. So I'm giving you guys all lines of communication setting, what your fingers are in traction in all directions. Right? But you have to understand how to calculate and modify through triangulation of all communications. Through your letters, okay, your numbers, your shapes, and your symbols. Okay? Your levels, your networks, your systematical system, okay, to your size settings, your size set locations. SYNC, sync. Okay, ground lines of surface and line rotation system and traction. Okay, solar cell and direct signals and modification ground lines of surface and traction. Okay, open panels and location grid and lines of communication lines of travel. All right, so now once we have the primer circuits and the 3 lines of communication lines of platforms, we have intersections of highways now and direct signals on all direct signals all through existing all at once interaction. Setting ground lines in surface and set position location to a system. Bring it back home, send calculations all through traction. All right. So that's all you guys got to do now, because you're basically coming into the triangulation into 3 cycles. Right? How to come into that. So computer on, computer off. Right? Computer overline. Okay, so that's overlines of 0.111. Okay? Now, if you want to go higher, your Schumann resonance has to go higher. So let's go through alpha, delta, theta. Okay? So 0, 1, 2, and 5. Okay, 0, 1, 2, 5. Process lines of 0, process lines of 1, process lines of 2, and process lines of 5. Bracket lines of course centers. There's the code frequency line and direct signals into modification breaking codes. 0, 1, 2, 5 in traction. What do we have in line screen adaptation? When you're processing communication system, what do you come in tractions of? What do you come in tractions of? Star recognition. Okay, guys? Star recognition is 5 platforms of sequence and 5 lines of zeros. There you go, right? Platform north, east, west, and south, and north. Sets lines of 2 line rotations and tractions and direct signals. Ground lines of surface and set calculations. All right? Arrow indicates this way, arrow indicates this way, and arrow indicates this way, and arrow indicates this way in travel. Okay? Communicates the grounds, lines of surface, and set position line of operation. Okay? So we ground center lines in 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division. Okay? Over sequence, over panel. Okay? So what you're doing with your computer as you turn it on and turn it off, you're putting it into what? You're turning it into what? A teleportation vessel, a vehicle, a pod. All through track location. All right? And that's all you're doing. The faster you go, the more you stand triangulations and settings. How to go through that in track locations, right? For example, if I'm voluming settings into 21 volume, into 10 cycles equals lines of triangulation into box. Okay, 3 lines of circles, setting course centers of 3 platforms and traction. All right, so I got 3 box locations in flux over line and direct signals of modification. Okay? Change the platforms and direct signals and track location. Okay. Sets communication lines of grounds and set course centers into your satellite communication. Your satellite. Woo! Now we signify the grounds, the powers, and its atmosphere set calculation. Okay. Then we come into this line connection system. All right. Platforms of E, center course system, platforms of G, and set track centers. Then we open sequence. Again, where we are in line rotation surface is track 2's communication setting, but it's all calculated screen adaptation of center calculation setting of ASCARD. Okay, right at the top sequence. So ASCARD, guys, is basically where you are. Let's go through the stairs again. Let's go up the stairs and tractions. Up the stairs, right? Your symbol isn't here, but you're always here. But you're in the center operation of U. Okay? Process 1, process 2. Right? Going up the stairs. Process 2, process 3. Right? So you're all coming together. You're all coming together now. You're all coming together through webbing system and lines of calculation setting, through your center clouds, your E-clouds, your factors, communication setting, your portals and stargates and track location. Okay? All through your grounds. Look. Okay. Then you come into this lines of track centers, line positions. Open sequence, open panel, and rotation surface and track location. Okay. And again, you come into flux over ground lines of surface and traction. Go again and 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 again, existing all at once in a 4-line setting. Process communication lines of grounds, powers, atmospheres, and highways, and line rotation surface and tractions. Look at that. Too quick, too fast. All right, so we're going to stop there on line signals, but I just want you to understand how to get in the modification system, how you change your triangulations of flux into time capacitor and flux capacitor into zeros and ones of travel. Okay? See you in 5.